brother took $30,000 from me, called it ancient history when I wanted it back, and then posted vacations online now. He's facing prison for committing fraud, and is begging for forgiveness. I never imagined I'd be sharing this story, but watching my brother's luxury vacation postings on social media while he sits on $30,000 of my money has pushed me past my breaking point. 5 years ago I made the stupid mistake of trusting family over my own financial security, and now I'm watching the consequences play out in real time through Instagram stories and posts from the Maldives. Let me start from the beginning. In 2019, my grandmother passed away, leaving me with an inheritance of $50,000. Had been saving for years, and this money was finally going to make my dream of home ownership possible. The housing market in our area was just starting to heat up, and I had my eye on several promising properties. I'd done everything right, maintained excellent credit, saved diligently, and researched first-time home buyer programs. This inheritance was the final piece one needed to make it happen. Then in March, my brother James showed up at my door in tears. We'd always been close growing up, though we drifted apart somewhat in adulthood as our lives took different paths. I went the traditional route: college, steady job, careful planning. James was always more of a risk taker, starting his own business right out of high school and living what seemed like a charmed life when things went well. That evening the charm had clearly worn off. His business was failing due to a combination of poor management and an economic downturn. He was 3 months behind on his mortgage, his credit cards were maxed out, and his wife Sarah was threatening to leave him if he couldn't get their finances under control. They had 2 kids, my niece and nephew, who were 10 and 8 at the time. The thought of them potentially losing their home or having their family torn apart broke my heart. James had always been my parents' favorite, the entrepreneurial spirit who was going to make it big someday. They'd invested in his various ventures over the years, but they'd taken significant losses during the recession and couldn't help this time. I was his last hope. He said he needed $30,000 to save his business and home, and he swore he'd pay me back within a year with 8% interest. I was hesitant. James was persistent. He brought up all our shared childhood memories, reminded me how he'd always looked out for me when we were kids, though my recollection of this differs from his. He even started crying when talking about how he couldn't bear to tell his kids they might have to leave their home and school. I agreed to lend him the money, but I insisted on a written agreement. James readily signed it, probably thinking he'd never have to honor. The agreement specified the loan of amount, interest rate, and a 1-year repayment timeline. I even had it notarized, which James laughed off as me being overly cautious. The first few months James was full of optimistic updates about how his business was turning around. Then the updates became less frequent, and the tone changed when I brought up repayment as the 1-year mark approached. The excuses began: his business was still recovering, his son needed emergency dental work, his wife's car broke down. Each excuse seemed legitimate on its own, but they started piling up suspiciously. By year 2, I was getting frustrated. The housing market in our area had exploded, and properties that would have been within my reach with my original down payment were now completely unattainable. I was stuck in an increasingly expensive rental, watching my monthly payments climb while my dream of home ownership slipped further away. Meanwhile, James's social media told a different story then. His excuses while telling me he was still struggling financially. He was posting about home renovations, his new gaming setup, and weekend getaways, about how he was still struggling and needed more time to get his finances in order before he could start repaying me. Seeing him post about living his best life and treating himself because he deserved it made something snap inside. I sent him a text pointing out that the money he was spending on his vacation could have gone toward his debt. To me, his response was what finally pushed me to take action. Come on, that was 5 years ago. Ancient history. You can't expect me to put my whole life on hold over ancient history. I'll pay you back when I can, but I need to live my life to ancient history. Those words kept repeating in my head. My lost opportunity to buy a house before the market went crazy. Ancient history. The years of stress and resentment watching him live luxuriously while dodging my request for repayment. The fact that I had to delay starting a family because I couldn't afford it without the financial cushion he took from me. That's when I decided enough was enough. I've consulted a lawyer who confirmed that my notarized agreement is legally binding. I'm now in the process of taking legal action to recover my money plus the accumulated interest. When I informed James of this, he exploded, calling me heartless and saying I was destroying our family over just money. The family has predictably taken his side. Our parents are telling me I'm being too harsh, that I should be more understanding of his situation. They seem to forget that I'm in my situation precisely because I was understanding of his. Even our extended family has gotten involved, with aunts and uncles calling to tell me how disappointed they are in my decision to attack my own brother. But I'm done being the understanding sibling who gets taken advantage of. But am I the __ for asking for my money back? Update 1. First, thank you all for the supportive comments and advice. I want to writing, and it was notarized. I know some people think I should have asked for collateral too. Well, honestly, I never imagined my own brother would do this to me. For those asking why I waited 5 years, I tried collecting numerous times. Throughout the years, I have documented evidence of at least 30 attempts to discuss repayment, all met with excuses or ignored. I was trying to be understanding because his family, which I now realize was a mistake. Several people suggest that I might be jealous of my brother's success. Let me be clear, I'm not jealous of someone who built their success on stolen money. I'm angry about being taken advantage of and watching him splash my money around on social media while I'm still dealing with the consequences of helping him. To those saying family is more important than money, where was that family loyalty when he was spending thousands on vacations instead of repaying me? Why am I the only one expected to sacrifice for family? And for everyone asking about my parents, yes, they've always favored James. I've gotten dozens of messages asking about the family dynamic, and you're right, this loan situation is just the latest example of a long pattern. Now on to the update. It's been 2 weeks since I sent the legal notice to James, and the resulting chaos in our family has surpassed even my worst expectations. I thought I was prepared for the fallout, but watching the people I've known my entire life choose sides in this conflict has been both enlightening and heartbreaking. The morning after my lawyer sent the notice, my phone exploded with notifications. James had apparently spent the night calling every family member in our contact list, spinning a tale of victimhood that conveniently omitted key details. According to him, his ungrateful sibling was trying to destroy him over an old family loan that he was always planning to repay. No mention of the Maldives vacation, the signed agreement, where the years of dodged responsibilities. My parents showed up unannounced at my apartment that evening. Mom was in tears, and Dad had the disappointed look I remembered from childhood, the one that used to make me cave instantly. They sat at my kitchen table and tried every emotional manipulation technique in their parental playbook. The conversation went about as well as you'd expect. My mother immediately started in on me. How could I be so heartless? He has children to think about. What kind of person tries to bankrupt their own brother over money? She'd raised me better than this. Of course I was being difficult about this, I was single, I didn't have any real responsibilities, but James had a family to support. She'd always thought I was selfish, but this was a new low even for me, the way she spat out the word single like it was some kind of moral failing, as if my lack of children somehow made my financial stability worthless. Just perfectly summed up how they've always seen me in this family. I reminded her that I also had life plans that were derailed by this loan, but she waved that off. You're single, you have time to recover. James has responsibilities. The fact that I'm single precisely because I couldn't afford to move forward with my life plans seemed lost on her. When I mentioned that James's recent vacation booking suggested he was doing just fine financially, Dad actually defended it. He works hard, he deserves to enjoy life a little. That's when I lost my patience and showed them the folder I'd been building, screenshots of James' social media posts over the past 5 years, showing a pattern of luxury purchases and vacations, texts and emails, documenting my attempts to collect and his increasingly dismissive responses, bank statements showing how my rental costs had increased while I remained unable to buy a home, most importantly a calculation of how much money I'd lost by not being able to buy a house when I originally planned to. Their responses were telling. Mom couldn't look at the evidence, literally turning away from my laptop screen. Dad examined everything carefully but still insisted that there must be another way to resolve this without legal action. When I asked what that way might be, given that I'd spent 5 years trying to resolve it amicably, he had no answer. They left shortly after, with Mom in tears and Dad shaking his head, but not before Mom got in one last dig. I hope you're happy knowing you're tearing this family apart when you're old and alone. Remember this moment. Remember how you chose money over family, rich coming from them, considering they'd had no problem watching me struggle financially for years, while praising James for his business acumen built on my stolen money. Things got even worse when my sister-in-law Sarah started harassing me. She called me repeatedly, leaving increasingly hostile voicemails about how I was trying to destroy her family. How dare you do this to us, she screamed in one message. Do you know how this is affecting our children? Their uncle is trying to bankrupt their parents over ancient history. When I didn't respond to her calls, she started texting me long paragraphs about how selfish and heartless I was. According to her, I was just jealous of their success and trying to tear them down because I couldn't stand to see them happy. She even had the audacity to suggest that I should be grateful they were finally living their best life because it meant they'd be able to pay me back eventually. You're just bitter because you're still renting while we own our house, she wrote. Maybe if you worked as hard as James, instead of trying to leech off his success, you'd be able to afford your own home. Her message just pushed me to dig deeper into James's business finances, which I'd previously avoided out of respect for their privacy. What I found was infuriating. His business had actually recovered well after the initial crisis, the one that had prompted the loan. By the end of the first year, he was turning a healthy profit. By year 3, he'd expanded to a second location, all while telling me he was still struggling to make ends meet. And there was Sarah living off the profits of my stolen money while having the nerve to call me a leech. The most vindictive part of me wanted to post all of this evidence on social media, especially under his vacation photos, but my lawyer advised against it, saying it could potentially complicate the legal proceedings. Instead, I've been methodically documenting everything, every accusatory text from relatives, every social media post showing his spending, every email where he acknowledges the debt but refuses to pay. The most surreal moment came when James's latest vacation photos were posted while I was meeting with my lawyer there. He was lounging in an infinity pool overlooking the ocean, captioning it "Living My Best Life," ignoring the haters. The timestamp showed he posted it during our scheduled meeting about his legal response to the lawsuit. My lawyer, reviewing the growing evidence of James's financial deception, seems increasingly confident about our case. The signed agreement, combined with documented proof of his ability to pay and his choice to spend money on luxuries instead, makes it pretty clear this isn't a case of can't pay but won't pay. As this update comes to a close, James has just filed his official response to the lawsuit. His lawyer arguments are as creative as his excuses for not paying, claiming the agreement was signed under duress, arguing that as a family member I should have known it wasn't meant to be legally binding, even suggesting that my documentation of his spending amounts to harassment. But the most telling detail is buried in his financial disclosure. The Maldives vacation was paid for in full in cash, just 2 days after he last texted me, saying he couldn't afford to start repaying the loan. Some family members are still pushing me to drop the lawsuit, warning that I'll regret destroying the family over money. What they don't understand is that James already did that when he chose to exploit my trust and kindness. I'm not destroying anything, and just finally refusing to maintain the facade that everything is fine while being taken advantage of. The next hearing is scheduled for next week, and despite the emotional toll, I'm more determined than ever to see this through. I'll post another update after the hearing next week if there are any significant developments. Thank you all for the support and validation. It really helps knowing I'm not crazy for finally standing up for myself after all these years. Update 2 to after my last update, things have gotten both better and worse, if that makes sense. The initial hearing was yesterday, and some interesting information has come to light that makes me even more certain I made the right decision in pursuing legal action. My lawyer had requested detailed financial records from James as part of the discovery process. What we found was far worse than I'd imagined. Not only had his business recovered within months of taking my loan, but he'd also been systematically hiding his true financial situation from everyone. Remember how Sarah had been harassing me about trying to bankrupt them? Turns out James has been lying to her too about their finances, but in the opposite direction from how he was lying to me. He's been claiming poverty and hardship to Sarah and their friends. He's been bragging about business success and upcoming expansions. He's been maintaining to completely different narratives: the successful businessman for his social circle and the struggling entrepreneur for anyone he owes money to. The Maldives vacation, that wasn't even their most expensive trip this year. They took a luxury cruise in January that cost nearly $20,000, but James kept it off social media because he was in the middle of telling me he couldn't even afford to start making small repayments. During the hearing, James tried to argue that the loan agreement shouldn't be enforceable because we're family, and he claimed he signed it under emotional duress. The judge wasn't impressed, especially when my lawyer presented evidence of his recent spending alongside his texts claiming financial hardship. James's face when his bank statements were brought out in court. I wish I could frame that moment and hang it on my wall. The most infuriating part was learning that James had actually taken out a business loan 3 years ago to open his second location. He had no problem making regular payments on that loan, proving he could have been paying me back this entire time. When the judge asked him to explain why he prioritized the bank loan over his debt to me, his response was telling: the bank wouldn't understand about family circumstances like my sister should my parents were in the courtroom too, though they hadn't told me they were coming. Mom kept making these little gasping sounds every time a new piece of evidence was presented, like she couldn't believe her precious son would do such things. Dad just sat there, getting progressively redder in the face. I thought he was angry at James at first, but during the recess he cornered me in the hallway and started yelling about how I was humiliating the family by airing our dirty laundry in public. I didn't engage with him. I just walked away, like my lawyer advised, but I wanted to scream back that James had humiliated me for 5 years, watching me struggle with rising rent while he spent my money on luxury vacations. The family's reputation seemed to matter more to Dad than the fact that his son had essentially stolen $330,000 from his daughter. The real bombshell came when we discovered that James had used my loan as proof of assets when applying for his business loan. He'd actually listed it as a private investment in his business plan, not a personal loan, making it look like he had more capital than he did. So not only did he take my money under false pretenses, but he also used it to fraudulently obtain more money from the bank. My lawyer's eyes practically lit up when she saw this documentation. Sarah has suddenly gone quiet after weeks of harassing me. I'm guessing she finally saw the real financial documents and realized just how much her husband has been lying to everyone. I almost feel sorry for her, but then I remember all the nasty messages she sent me about being jealous of their success. The judge has ordered a full forensic accounting of James's business and personal finances for the past 5 years. James's lawyer tried to argue this was unnecessary, but given the evidence of financial deception already uncovered, the judge wasn't having it. We're scheduled for another hearing in 2 weeks. Once the account is complete, family telling me I should be ashamed of myself for destroying my brother's reputation. Apparently word has gotten around about what was revealed in court, but I didn't destroy anything. James did that himself when he chose to lie and deceive everyone for years. I'm just finally pulling back the curtain on his schemes. Some relatives have suggested I drop the case and accept a partial payment to keep the peace. They don't seem to understand that peace was never an option once I discovered the extent of James's deception. This isn't just about the money anymore, it's about holding him. Accounting results are in, and my lawyer wasn't kidding when she hinted there would be more surprises. I needed a few days to process everything before writing this update, because what we uncovered goes beyond just my loan. For those asking in the comments about bank fraud, you were right. James didn't just use my loan as proof of assets for one business loan. He's been running a complex shell game, taking loans from multiple banks using the same assets as collateral, including my investment. Each new loan was used partly to pay off previous ones, creating an illusion of successful business growth. My $30,000 was essentially the foundation for a house of cards that's now starting to collapse. The forensic accountant found that in the first year after taking my loan, James' business actually generated over $200,000 in profit. Instead of repaying me, he used that money to put a down payment on an investment property, which he then used as collateral for more loans. He kept telling me he was struggling while systematically using my money to build his personal real estate portfolio. During the most recent hearing, James tried a new strategy through his lawyer. He offered to pay me back the full amount plus interest if I would sign an NDA and agree not to share any information about his financial practices with the banks he borrowed from. The judge's reaction was priceless. She actually laughed out loud and reminded his lawyer that attempting to cover up bank fraud with an NDA could be considered conspiracy. My parents have done a complete 180, but not in the way you might expect. Instead of finally accepting that James was in the wrong, they're now blaming me even more intensely. According to them, if I hadn't selfishly pursued legal action, none of James's creative business practices would have come to light. Mom actually said I was destroying my brother's life over a little loan between family. When I pointed out that bank fraud was a serious crime, Dad told me I should be ashamed for caring more about banks than my own brother. Sarah has filed for separation not because of the lying or fraud, mind you, but because the impending legal consequences might affect their lifestyle. She sent me a long email blaming me for forcing her to leave James by exposing his financial dealings. Apparently, I should have just accepted being stolen from so her children could continue enjoying luxury vacations. The forensic accountant also uncovered that James has been hiding money in offshore accounts. Remember that cruise they took in January? It was paid for through a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. My lawyer estimates that he's moved over $500,000 offshore in the past 3 years while claiming he couldn't afford to repay my $3,000. The judge has frozen all of James's known assets pending further investigation. His lawyer tried to argue this was unnecessary since James had offered to pay me back, but given the evidence of systematic fraud, the court wasn't taking any chances. As my lawyer explained, this isn't just about my loan anymore, it's about potentially years of financial crimes. James finally tried to talk to me directly after the hearing. He was crying, saying he never meant for things to go this far. He claimed he had always intended to pay me back, but the opportunities to grow his business kept coming up, and he convinced himself that building a bigger company would ultimately be better for everyone. When I asked why he spent money on luxury vacations instead of repaying me, he said he had to maintain appearances for business networking. The criminal investigation is now officially underway. My lawyer says I should prepare for this to get messy before it gets better. Some of James's business associates are already being questioned, and there's talk of a wider fraud investigation involving multiple banks. I'm trying to stay focused on the legal proceedings and not let the family drama consume me. But it's hard when my parents keep trying to guilt me into dropping everything before it's too late. For what? For James to avoid consequences for the truth about his business practices to stay hidden. My lawyer has advised me not to post any more specific details about the ongoing investigation, so my next update might take a while. I just want to thank everyone for their support and advice. For those asking, yes, I'm in therapy and it's helping me process all of this, and no, I don't regret pursuing legal action. If anything, finding out the true extent of James's deception has only confirmed I made the right choice. Update for final update. It's been almost 2 years since my last update, and I can finally share what happened. A lot has changed in this time, and I've waited until everything was fully settled legally before posting this final update. The criminal investigation into James's financial dealings revealed even more than the forensic accounting had shown. Over the past 5 years, he had taken out multiple loans using the same collateral, created fake business documentation, and misrepresented his assets to several banks. My $30,000 loan was just the tip of the iceberg. He had been running what essentially amounted to a Ponzi scheme, using new loans to pay off old ones while pocketing the difference. James ended up accepting a plea deal. He's facing 2 years in prison with the possibility of early release, plus hefty fines and restitution payments to various banks. The judge ordered him to liquidate his assets to pay back his debts, including my loan. I finally received my $30,000 back, plus the accumulated interest and legal fees. My parents have had a complete breakdown over this. Mom hasn't stopped crying since the sentencing, and Dad hasn't spoken to me in weeks. They're selling their house to help pay for James's legal fees, and moving into a smaller place every time I think about how they're sacrificing their retirement to clean up James' mess while still defending his actions. I feel a mixture of sadness and frustration. Sarah finalized her divorce from James last month. She's been telling everyone who will listen that she had no idea about his financial dealings and that she's the real victim here, considering she was happily spending money on luxury vacations while harassing me about wanting my loan repaid. I find that hard to believe. She's moved in with her parents and is trying to maintain the lifestyle she's used to by demanding excessive alimony, despite the fact that most of James's assets are being seized to pay his debts. James tried one last manipulation attempt before reporting to prison. He sent me a letter playing the repentant brother, probably on advice from his lawyer, to try for a more lenient sentence. It was full of the same old tactics, reminiscing about childhood memories that never happened, making excuses about feeling pressure to succeed and claiming he always intended to pay me back. Even facing prison time, he couldn't help but try to make himself the victim. He ended the letter asking me to speak at his sentencing about his good character and how this was just a misunderstanding between siblings. I didn't respond. After everything he'd done, he was still trying to use family ties to escape consequences. Some people in my life suggested he might have changed, that prison was making him reflect on his actions, but I know better. Manipulators don't change, they just adapt their tactics to their current situation. I've used the repaid money to make a down payment on a house. The market is still expensive, but at least I'm finally getting out of the rental cycle. It's not the house I could have bought 5 years ago, but it's mine and I earned it. Honestly, some people have suggested I should feel guilty about James going to prison, but I don't. He had countless opportunities to make things right over the years. He chose to continue lying and defrauding people instead. The consequences he's facing now are the result of his own choices, not my decision to stop enabling him. As for my parents, I'm giving them space to process everything. Maybe someday they'll understand that by holding James accountable, I did what they should have done years ago. They won't. I've made peace with either outcome. My lawyer tells me there might be more legal proceedings as the banks pursue civil cases against James, but I won't be posting any more updates. This chapter of my life is finally closed and I'm ready to move forward, so I won't be responding to comments or messages anymore. Thank you to everyone who supported me through this journey. Your encouragement helped me stay strong when my own family was trying to make me doubt myself.